Cador's Pacific Region, podcast number 10, Boundary Bay. The Boundary Bay Aerodrome is located 10 nautical miles southeast of the Vancouver International Airport. Runway 0725 is 5,606 feet long and 100 feet wide. Runway 1230 is 3,750 feet long and 100 feet wide. The aerodrome elevation is 6 feet. The aerodrome is Class Charlie and is served by a tower during the day. It sits beneath the Vancouver Terminal Class Charlie control zone. In 2014, Boundary Bay was the 7th busiest airport in Canada when measured by aircraft movements. In this episode, we have 4 reports occurring at or near Boundary Bay to discuss. I'm Brad Crockett, private pilot, single-engine land. Joining me here at the Victoria Flying Club is Eleanor Eastick. Eleanor has accumulated 900 hours flying time, holds a commercial pilot's license, and for about 10 years made frequent trips between Victoria and Boundary Bay. Eleanor, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for asking me to do this. It's my great pleasure.
Our first report is Cador's number 2001 P0151. Nav Canada reports that on March 9, 2001, at 1935 Zulu, the weather at Boundary Bay Airport was good VFR and training was in progress. Both runway 25 and runway 30 were in use in simultaneous intersecting runway operations. A Piper Cherokee, registration Golf Oscar Uniform Papa, was given landing clearance on runway 30 and instructed to cross through the intersection of runways 30 and 25 onto taxiway Alpha. A Cessna 182, registration Foxtrot X-Ray Lima Victor, was in position on runway 25. The Cherokee was observed in the intersection moving towards taxiway Alpha. The 182 was then given a takeoff clearance. Prior to the 182 commencing the takeoff roll on 25, the Cherokee was observed to stop in the runway intersection. The 182 pilot, who had not yet started the takeoff roll, was instructed to abort the takeoff and instructed again to stop. The 182 took off nonetheless and proceeded to enter the Vancouver Terminal Class Charlie airspace without prior authorization. He proceeded to Victoria International Airport. The Cherokee, while stationary in the runway intersection, contacted ground control. Later, the pilot of the Cherokee was contacted to discuss his stopping as he did, but he spoke only a little broken English. When contacted, the pilot of the 182 reported that he did not hear the instruction to abort or to stop. That's the end of the report. Eleanor, why would the tower clear the 182 to take off with the Cherokee still in the intersection of the runway?
Well, I can only presume that the tower fully expected the Cherokee to pass through the intersection of 25 and 30 and continue on to Alpha. Boundary Bay is so busy that clearances are issued very, very quickly.
Why would the Cherokee stop in the intersection of 30 and 25 instead of proceeding to a taxiway?
I would suspect that the pilot's poor English was behind all that. He either didn't understand the instruction or was uncertain of his position. It's a 3-way intersection with 2 runways and a taxiway, and from ground level it can be confusing. There is quite an expanse of pavement as seen from the cockpit.
How could the pilot of the 182 hear the takeoff clearance but not hear the instruction to abort?
I think the pilot of the 182 was concentrating on his takeoff procedure after the clearance, and the cancellation would be unexpected, so he wasn't even listening for anything like that. With the amount of continual radio traffic at Boundary Bay, he failed to notice the cancellation, likely because he wasn't listening for his call sign and he was concentrating on what he had to do once he was airborne.
What can pilots do to be as safe as possible at aerodromes with intersecting runways?
I would say you've got to be very familiar with the aerodrome layout beforehand. Have the layout in front of you on your lap if you can, or on a GPS or something like that, and you can tentatively plan your route in advance based on which runways are in use. Know exactly where you are, too, so you'll know what to look out for, what to expect, and above all, listen to the tower. Be totally alert as to what's going on at every moment.
Our second report is CADORS number 2001 P0370. NAV Canada reports that on May 31st, 2001, at 0 hours 25 Zulu, the McLeod School of Aviation Cessna 172G, registration Golf Alpha Hotel Golf, was cleared for takeoff, runway 25, and advised of traffic ahead in the circuit. Alpha Hotel Golf proceeded to turn early inside of the crosswind leg of the Monterey Aviation Cessna 172R, registration Golf Mike Alpha Zulu. The aircraft conflicted, and evasive action was initiated by Mike Alpha Zulu. The controller had attempted to pass traffic information to Mike Alpha Zulu, but was not successful. That's the end of the report. What do you think happened in this case?
The circuit turns at 400 AGL at Boundary Bay. The tower didn't say just where MAZ was in the circuit when AHG was cleared for takeoff, nor does the report state how soon it was after the takeoff of MAZ, presumably in a touch and go, that the clearance was given. There's also no weather given, that is rain or mist or low cloud over the strait. I would guess that AHG just didn't see the other aircraft, with his only information being it was ahead in the circuit. Why did AHG turn early? That's hard to say. A slight error in setting the altimeter, or just poor airmanship? Or perhaps the other aircraft turned at 500 feet instead of 400 feet? The controller was unsuccessful in passing on the information to MAZ. The frequencies are so busy at Boundary Bay, and MAZ was likely engrossed in avoiding the conflict with AHG and just simply missed the call.
What should pilots departing runway 25 at Boundary Bay do to make this departure as safe as possible?
All I can say about that is to listen to ATC instructions. Be sure you understand them and conform to the letter. Maintain a careful listening watch and keep a sterile cockpit. The radio traffic is very heavy and it's easy to miss something. Also keep your eyes open for other traffic and be aware that there are students at various skill levels and students with poor English who may not understand instructions. Boundary Bay is in a built-up area and it can be very difficult to spot other aircraft.
Our third report is CADORS number 2005 P2193. NAV Canada reports that on November 7th, 2005, at 20:09 Zulu, the Regency Express Cessna 172M, registration Golf Foxtrot Victor November, was being flown by a student pilot practicing solo circuits. During a soft-field touch-and-go procedure on runway 12, the student noticed the aircraft was not accelerating just after liftoff. The student elected to abort the takeoff and touch down and rolled off the end of the runway onto the runway 30 displaced threshold. The student then taxied onto the taxiway under his own power and returned to the flight school. The aircraft was checked for any damage and none was found. The airspeed indicator was also checked and found to be operating normally. The student cannot remember whether they retracted the flaps prior to the addition of power. The instructor has stated that the student will undergo additional training prior to being allowed to solo again. That's the end of the report. Did this pilot do the right thing?
It's easy to say in hindsight that he did the right thing. He was at least able to stop the takeoff in time to touch down again safely on the runway and taxi off it. I suspect that the carb heat had been left on, and possibly 20 or more degrees of flap. In any case, since he would have been heading out over Boundary Bay itself, over water or deep mud, he certainly wanted to be able to accelerate and climb properly. As a student, he may not even have thought of carb heat and flaps as a cause of diminished power. I've left the carb heat on myself in a climb out, and so have all of my pilot friends. It happens, but with experience, that's the first thing you notice if the engine power is less than it should be.
What should we do when conducting a touch and go prior to advancing the throttle?
Have the airplane in a stable, straight rollout on the center line, check flaps set, check carb heat cold, and check trim set for takeoff. Advance the throttle smoothly and listen to ATC in case there is any change in instruction. For example, make it a left or a right-hand circuit this time, or a heads up for traffic. Be prepared.
Our final report is CDORS number 2008 P0445. In this report, the Dease Tunnel is mentioned, and this is not charted. It's about 5 nautical miles west-northwest of the gas stations and about 3 nautical miles northwest of the field on the extended center line of runway 1230. The report reads as follows. A pilot and Nav Canada report that on March 6, 2008, at 2300 Zulu, a privately registered Vans RV9A, VFR, while over the gas stations, was number 5 for landing, with 2 other aircraft following. The RV was vectored to the Dease Tunnel for spacing, then called back for approach and landing for runway 12. A Pacific Professional Flight Center Cessna 152, registration Gulf Zulu Sierra Papa, was instructed to follow the RV and reported him in sight. The 152 then turned base and cut off the RV. As the RV completed the turn, the pilot spotted the conflicting 152, executed a right-hand 360-degree turn, and called the tower to notify them of the maneuver. As the RV turned back on heading, the pilot noticed another Cessna on his left who was approaching, plus the original conflicting aircraft on his right. The pilot of the RV landed and taxied to the terminal. The RV pilot estimated the nearest conflict was within 200 feet. That's the end of the report. Why would the 152 cut off the RV?
I sound like a broken record, but once again, it is difficult to see other light aircraft air to air. You glance down at the instruments, and when you look up again, you've lost sight of your traffic, or mistake another aircraft for your traffic. Boundary Bay is heavily built up. There can be many planes in the circuit or inbound. The controllers are very busy. The radio is very busy. There's also Vancouver, King George Air Park, and an American airstrip at Point Roberts. Lots of traffic aloft in a complex airspace.
What can pilots do to improve safety at controlled aerodromes where there are many aircraft in the circuit?
Be very aware of your surroundings. Study the airport diagram in the CFS and know the call-up points so you know where to look if there is a traffic point out. Listen diligently to the tower. Keep a sterile cockpit and concentrate on your instructions. I would say ask if you're not sure, but the radio traffic is so busy at Boundary Bay you may not get a chance. Pay close attention to what is going on around your position in the air and be prepared to maneuver if ATC asks.
That's it for this episode. Subscribe to the podcast in iTunes, SoundCloud, or TuneIn Radio, or visit the website cadors.ca. Eleanor, how can people best reach you?
I'm reachable by email, which is flypup@shaw.ca.
Eleanor, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. I'm a wreck pilot, and I can only give my observations on things from my own experience over 24 years of enjoyable and safe flying. Thank you for the opportunity to share my take on Boundary Bay.
And thank you for listening as we exercise our license to learn. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided is done at your own risk. This podcast should not be considered professional advice. If you have a question about an aviation occurrence reported in CDORS, whether we've discussed it here or not, send an email to podcast@cadors.ca.